Hello, welcome back for another session of WIMBA with Young. We are, during this session, looking at coronary blood flow as well as fluid physics and some of the properties that are going to be regulating or determining blood flow throughout the body. And that will lead us into a nice little conversation about finally some of the biochemical responses to changing blood flow within the body, and we'll deal with that during our next lecture that we have together. So why don't we start off by first kind of getting acquainted with our coronary blood flow. I mentioned in the last WIMBA session that as the blood is leaving the left ventricle and entering into the aorta, there are two small openings or holes at the base of that aorta that will supply the heart with blood. Respectively, that would be the left coronary artery and the right coronary artery. What we need to understand about that, and we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail, is that about 4 to 5% of the total blood flow for the body is reserved for the heart. Now, think about the heart in relation to the whole body. It is not the largest organ. It's not the second largest organ in the body. It's not the third largest organ in the body. I would gather to say it's not the fifth, sixth, or maybe even the seventh largest organ in the body. We have skin, we have brain, we have lungs, we have stomach, we have intestines, and we have liver. All of those are going to be larger than the heart. But yet all of them, maybe with the exception of the brain, take less blood to operate. And so when we talk about 5% of the total blood flow being strictly reserved for the heart, you're talking about a huge portion in reality, or a large portion in reality of that blood being reserved for maintaining the viability of the heart. Again, as we mentioned, there are two branches of the coronary system that come directly off of the aorta, the left coronary artery and the right coronary artery. And if we take a look at this diagram here, we can see very nicely in living color these arteries that are coming off. And so if we look, this artery right there would be the left coronary artery. So we've got the left coronary artery right there, and coming off of the other side of the aorta would be the right coronary artery, located again right there. Both of these arteries have a multitude of branches that really thrive to feed or supply mainly the ventricles. The ventricles are where we are concerned about blood flow primarily. We do have the left atrium and the right atrium, and so right in this area here, not that specific circle, but you can kind of see where that outline is going, is the right atrium, and then over here would be located the left atrium. And this whole area down in this area, primarily, with some additional areas over in here, is all ventricle, and that's where you're going to find the bulk of your arteries for the heart, for the coronary system. Why don't we go ahead and start our look at this with the left coronary artery. We can see that it has two branches, and I also want to mention that the left coronary artery is going to travel through the coronary sulcus, which is really found under the left atrium. And so the left coronary artery is traveling under the outside of that left atrium. There is the outside covering of the atria are referred to as auricles. And that I will put up here because I don't think I mentioned that during lecture. Auricles are the outside covering of the atria. Hopefully I'll be able to show you this at some point in time so that we can kind of get a clearer understanding of what I'm talking about. But that outside covering of the atria, if you go underneath of that, is where you would find the left coronary artery. And from there, you have two major divisions. You have the circumflex artery, which is going to be located right here. And that circumflex artery travels down the superior portion of the left ventricle and then wraps itself around and behind the ventricle. And what it does is it basically supplies the left atrium and the posterior side of the left ventricular wall with blood. And so the circumflex artery is going to supply the left atrium as well as the posterior ventricular wall with the blood that it needs. We also have the interventricular artery. This is going to be the artery, the larger artery coming off of the left coronary artery, where you can actually visibly see on the front side of the heart. And it is this interventricular branch, this anterior interventricular artery, that is going to supply both ventricles, if you would, with blood flow. So this is a coronary artery that not only supplies the left side of the heart or the ventricle with blood, but it's also going to supply to some extent the right side with blood as well. And you can see that the anterior interventricular artery is going to wrap itself down around the apex or the base of the heart and wrap itself again up and around to the posterior side. When we look at the right coronary artery, we see, and again we'll start from the back and work our way forward, but we see the posterior interventricular artery, and that is going to be located posteriorly, and you see that it's kind of shaded a lighter pink. I'll always point to one of the branches right there. And again, I lost my train of thought. The posterior interventricular artery, this is where I was going with that, is again going to supply the posterior walls of both ventricles, as well as part of the interventricular septum with the blood supply. So posterior interventricular artery is going to supply the posterior side of both ventricles with the blood that it needs, as well as the interventricular septum. And then the right marginal artery, which is this guy right here, he is going to basically supply the front of the right ventricle with blood, as well as the right atrium with blood. And so that's kind of where the divisions are made for who's supplying who with blood. Right atrium, the sinoatrial node, of course, is going to be supplied through that as well. And it, again, is going to follow under the right auricle, or that right outer covering of the atrium. Just to make sure we are clear, so I don't want anyone leaving this page confused in any way. The circumflex artery. The circumflex artery, which I have outlined here as CF. Sorry, I'm clicking away here. is going to supply the left atrium as well as the posterior left ventricle with blood. And so that would be the circumflex artery, left atrium, posterior left ventricle, whereas the anterior interventricular artery is going to supply both ventricles with the blood, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier or not, the lower 2/3 of the interventricular septum. And so it's the lower 2/3 of the interventricular septum. And so that's kind of the range as far as where the circumflex artery and the anterior interventricular artery is going to supply its blood. If we look at the opposite side and we turn our attention to the posterior interventricular artery, we are going to see blood supplied to the posterior walls of both ventricles, posterior wall of the ventricles, both of them, both the right and the left, as well as the interventricular septum. And it would be everything else that's not covered by the anterior interventricular artery. All right. So the posterior interventricular artery is the posterior wall of the ventricles, both left and right, and the interventricular septum, basically the upper 1/3 of that. And the right marginal artery is going to supply the right atrium, and it will also supply the right ventricle as well. And that got cut off. Crap-a-doo. I'll put it over here. As well as the right ventricle, in addition to the right atrium. So that's your breakdown, and that's your blood flow through. From the heart, we see the blood is then going to leave or enter into the rest of the aorta, where it will, of course, supply the upper portion of the body through the ascending aortic branch, but it will also begin its journey downward as it goes throughout the body. So so it'll go into the abdominal arteries, also sometimes referred to as the descending aorta, and there it will supply the with the renal artery. It will also help to supply the hepatic system as well as the digestive system with the blood. And you can kind of see that networking of capillaries that are at work there. And then you have the remaining descending arteries down here, which is going to help to supply basically the groin area and the legs. So, if we look at how all of this flows into or throughout the body, as we have seen with a lot of other areas in anatomy and physiology, things when left to their own accord will typically flow from an area of higher pressure or higher concentration to an area of lower pressure or lower concentration. Because we're dealing with fluids here, this is going to be moving from an area of higher pressure to an area of lower pressure. And so we can see fairly easily that the arteries are going to have the area of highest pressure, as well as the left side of the heart, so the left ventricle. The lowest amount of pressure is going to be within the vena cava, which is not necessarily identified here, but if we kind of come all the way down here where it says veins, that's going to be leading into the heart. And again, what would cause the loss of pressure? That loss of pressure going from 120 millimeters of mercury down to almost no millimeters of mercury is going to be, for the most part, friction. I know we discussed about a lot of different possibilities during lecture, but when it comes down to friction, we understand that friction will work its magic as it goes through the system and cause it to slow down. And when I say it, of course, I'm referring to blood flow. A lot of this has to do with the concept of hydraulic pressure right here. We talked briefly about the fact that when something is hydrostatic, it is A, not in motion, and B, exerting equal pressure throughout the system or the vessel that it is enclosed in. And so the force exerted by a fluid on the container holding the fluid is what we refer to as the hydrostatic fluid. What we are concerned with is the hydraulic pressure, which is that study of the fluid in motion. As the fluid is moving through the system, it is still exerting force on the container that it is being held in, but it is also at the same time generating friction, which is going to slow it down. And so that's what we need to be aware of as we begin to talk about hydraulic pressure. I want you to look at this diagram here and see if this makes any sense to you, and I'll be back here in a couple of seconds. All right, so how much sense does this make to you? We see that when things are plugged, such as right here, that pressure is going to be equally exerted throughout the system. The water is going to maintain the same level. The pressure is going to be equal. This is hydrostatic, simply because nothing's moving, but the pressure is remaining equal. When we come down to the bottom picture and we see hydraulic pressure or hydraulic fluid, what we're talking about here is you release that plug, and as you release the plug, the pressure, or at least the level, begins to drop. And so you no longer have equal pressure throughout the system. Yes, you still have pressure, but your greatest amount of pressure is going to be located right here. And then that pressure begins to decrease over time as your fluid is flowing out. And so because you are reducing the amount of fluid, you reduce the pressure that's being exerted within the force. All right, and so what I'd like to try to do is relate this, if you would, to that of a balloon. Now, I'm going to try something here. Don't anyone get all too excited over this, but we're going to try this. I've got myself my little webcam here, and it should be popping up, and you can see I've got right here a balloon. It is a water balloon. I'm going to slide my little image over. And I want you to think of the heart as being, this water balloon. And when we squeeze it, we know the pressure is going to increase going towards the top. All right, so I am increasing the pressure of the balloon right here. Now, eventually that'll go back to its original shape, but you can see that I have, yes, definitely exerted pressure. So again, I'm going to squeeze it. You can see that pressure increasing within that water balloon. That is what we refer to as driving pressure. It is this pressure right here, as we squeeze this water balloon, that is going to basically force the blood out of the ventricle and into your aorta, into the circulatory system as it was. This is under tremendous pressure. You can imagine how much pressure I am now exerting on this fluid that is now pressing against the wall of the balloon. If I was to continue to do this, what would begin to happen? The balloon would pop. Well, we don't want that to happen within the heart. We don't want this driving pressure to cause such a great amount of pressure within the heart that the heart basically explodes. What we do want to happen, though, is to be able to have this valve, basically where I have the balloon tied off, to open up. And when that does, we know that there is more pressure inside of the balloon, there's less pressure outside of the balloon, and that's going to lead to replacement of that low pressure, so that the blood is going to flow from an area of higher pressure to an area of lower pressure as we exert that driving force. And so this was something that I did want to show you in class, and I did not get a chance to do that, so I think you've been able to see that here. When we talk about changes in pressure, we understand that the heart during the contraction is going to have the highest amount of pressure, and the heart during the contraction is going to have to, I'm sorry about this. If it's not the phone, it is the cell phone. And of course, that pressure is going to drop during relaxation. The vessels, on the other hand, to increase or to deal with the increase in the pressure, it will dilate, which will allow some of that pressure to fall. But if it needs to increase blood pressure for some reason, it can constrict, and that will increase the pressure. And basically what it's trying to do is regulate the volume of blood that is found within the vessels. So, what did I just say? Well, basically what I said was that as we go over distance, the flow will change based on the pressure. Right? So as you go from an area of higher pressure to an area of lower pressure, your flow will begin to decrease. And so that flow of blood is directly linked, aka proportional, to the pressure gradient. Now here's this term gradient again. And what we simply are referring to here is the progression of that pressure, or the line at which that pressure is going to follow. The higher the pressure gradient, the greater the flow of the fluid is going to be. So the more pressure that is being exerted, the faster that fluid is going to move. And that's exactly what we are looking at down here, where delta P, and that means delta P is change in pressure, the change in pressure. And so as we go from the beginning of the vessel to the end of the vessel, the difference in the pressure that we find there is delta P. It's the change of pressure. And so what we would expect is that to be linked directly to the flow. So that where we have 100 milligrams or 100 millimeters of mercury here and 100 millimeters of mercury here, we have no change in pressure, so therefore you're not going to have any change in flow. That blood is going to continue to do its thing, and that is flowing through the vessel. All right. But where we have here a change in pressure, we start at 100 millimeters of mercury and we go to 75 millimeters of mercury, we see a decrease in pressure, which means that as the blood is flowing through this vessel, the pressure is changing, and so therefore the rate at which it's going to flow is also going to change. And we see that same thing happening down below. We can summarize this with Pascal's law, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. Pascal, French physicist, basically said that resistance is going to be inversely proportional to the flow, or flow is inversely proportional to resistance. So resistance is the tendency of the cardiovascular system to slow down the blood flow. As you increase resistance, you are going to decrease flow. As you increase resistance, you will decrease flow. And that's this equation right here. Flow is proportional to 1 over big R, which is resistance. Flow is proportional to 1 over R. Because you're dealing with a fraction, we simply say flow is inversely proportional to resistance. It's the same thing as what you're looking at there in the orange box. And what we've been able to identify is that there are 3 factors that affect resistance. A, the length of the vessel. B, the viscosity, or the ability or ease of something to flow, in this case the blood. And C, the radius of the vessel. The body does not hopefully change the length of the vessel, so we're going to neglect that. The other thing that doesn't really change much is the viscosity of the blood. It changes some, but not a whole lot. And so what we're left to really deal with when we talk about Pascal's law is the radius of the vessel, which is changing constantly. Vasoconstriction, vasodilation. And that's what we're talking about when we refer to the radius of the vessel. And so what his law says is that basically it's resistance is proportional to L, that little goofy N sign, divided by R to the 4th, where length is the resistance to length. Mu, that's what that sign is there. Mu is viscosity, and so mu would be the resistance to the increase as viscosity increases. Again, we are not concerned about these two because they don't really change all that much. And so what are we left with being concerned about? We are left being concerned about radius. And so what that boils down to for us is this equation right here. Big R, which is radius, is going to be inversely proportional to little r, the radius. Big R, the resistance, is going to be inversely proportional to little r, the radius, to the fourth power. Here we have a slide. Vessel 1, vessel 2. Vessel 2 is twice as large as vessel 1 when it comes to the diameter. And so therefore, the resistance to flow in vessel 2 is 1/16 that of vessel 1, which means the rate of flow in vessel 2 is going to be 16 times faster than that of vessel 1. Resistance is inversely proportional to the radius times 4. Flow is proportional to the radius times 4. Resistance is inversely proportional to the radius times 4. Flow is proportional to the radius times 4. I'll say it one more time. Resistance is inversely proportional to the radius to the fourth power. Flow is proportional to the radius to the fourth power. As the radius increases, your resistance decreases. As radius increases, your resistance decreases. But down here, as your radius increases, your flow increases. Take a straw. If that straw has a radius of 1, then it's going to be 1 over 1 to the fourth power, which is 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, which is going to equal 1. 1 over 1 is equal to 1. All right, now, if we take that, so it's going to have a resistance of 1. All right. If we take the straw and we stretch it and increase the radius so that it is now 2, it is now 1 over 2 to the fourth. Two times 2. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 equals 16. And so now our resistance is 1/116. It's 16 times less with a radius of 2 than what it is of a radius of 1. And so therefore, with a resistance of 1/16, your resistance decreases, yet your flow increases. If we look at this in the perspective of fluid, if you have your beaker of water here, your big old huge hunk of beaker of water, all right, right there, and we want to look at flow from the perspective of how much water is going to flow into this vessel versus how much water is going to flow into B. Well, vessel or tube 1 has a radius of 1. Tube 2 or tube B has a radius of 2. And so you're going to have 16 times more water or fluid flowing through B than what you are 1, because the resistance is 1/16 that of vessel 1. Hopefully that makes somewhat of sense to you. And if it does, good. If it doesn't, go back to the part where you are confused, pause, study those images, see if you can talk it through yourself. If you still are having problems, please, please, please feel free to email me and ask me whatever questions that you need. As always, I encourage you to have happy studying and email me, and I will see you in our next lecture.